Welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast, where we sit down and have real conversations with business leaders that have been where you are. During these interviews, we'll dive into what it takes to improve systems and champion processes that maximize performance. Each week, our trailblazing guests share their experiences and understanding of the workforce to help inspire change, challenge our thinking, and share what it takes to successfully travel the road to profitability. Now here's our host, co-founder and chief evangelist of About Time and WorkMax, Mike Merrill.
Hello and welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I am your host, Mike Merrill, and today we are sitting down with Darcy Boerio, the president of DAB Partners and the co-host of the Enterprise Software Podcast. Darcy has nearly 25 years of experience in on-site technology and implementations. So we are very excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining us, Darcy.
Mike, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for asking me to come, and it's great to see you.
Yeah, we've kind of had some of our events that we used to see each other at shut down this last year.
Yeah, just a bit. The only time I see you is when you're out running on Instagram.
Well, I try and do that as much as I can. So
You're
I need
amazing.
to post some of your running pics too.
Yeah, I need to do more of them.
Sounds good. Well, I'll post more and I'll watch for you too. So, well, before we dig into the conversation today, can you give our listeners just a little bit of your background and experience?
Sure. So I started my software career at Timberline Software about mid-90s. And worked in the Beaverton, Oregon headquarters for the next 10 years or so. I started in support, and over the course of the 10 years, I always joke that I worked on every segment of every floor in the building because I went from support, I did consulting, then I moved upstairs and I was in QA for 3 years, believe it or not, and
Wow.
then moved to sales and marketing. So worked kind of in all facets of that business before joining Alliance Solutions Group as one of the original employees, then Timberline, Sage Construction and Real Estate, or many iterations of that over the years, reseller. Around 2012, I decided to exit the construction business because I couldn't hang with the economy. So I went and worked for Avalara, cloud-based sales tax automation software, and then did a couple of years with some different ISVs. And in 2017, somewhere along the way, I started co-hosting a podcast, Enterprise Software Podcast. I've been doing that for about 6 years and really have discovered my passion for all things ERP software. And then started my own business, DAB Partners, in 2017, where I consult with software publishers to help them grow their partner channels and referral networks.
Wow. That's a long and illustrious career. So, and you're not done yet, right?
No.
Your husband says no, right?
Yeah, right.
So Darcy's husband Tim also works for Alliance Solutions still. So I run into him quite a bit as well, and he's another great friend in the industry. So you mentioned something there. You use the word ERP. Can you just explain what that stands for those listeners that maybe don't or aren't familiar with that?
Absolutely. Enterprise resource planning software. And, it's not a term that we've used in the construction industry. When I was around the construction industry, we just called it, we'd call it construction accounting software, or we called it even maybe construction financial and operations software. But ERP really implies, you'll get different answers from different people. But to me, it's not just saying, okay, we're just doing accounting and then we're going to do something else over here and something else over here and all these disparate solutions. It's saying we're going to find a product or products that work together that cover our entire enterprise. And so, we used to kind of leave it to the realm of manufacturers and distribution. We didn't really talk about it in terms of construction until fairly, recent years. But really, it's for a construction company, we'd want it something that's going to cover their, obviously, their job cost accounting, their estimating, their project management, maybe service management, and have it all be integrated together seamlessly rather than having a bunch of different products for each of those things. So I would say that's kind of the big difference of what an ERP is today in the construction world.
Yeah, versus just an old accounting and payroll system.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's a lot of areas of the business that a system like that touches. So I imagine with mobility being such a big piece of today's ecosystem, that's just a whole other dynamic. How have you seen that play into the ERP space at this point?
I mean, it's huge, and it really expands out, the ability to have a true ERP environment, because you're able to put integrated tools in the hands of people that aren't sitting in the office connected to the server. And so it just makes it that much easier to accomplish that goal of, keeping everyone on the same system and all in sync and together in ERP. And, mobile is such a crucial part of ERP. You can't have an ERP or an ERP add-on solution without some sort of mobility component, especially today, obviously. So
yeah, and the mobile, I guess essentially would be an apps or some type of collection to feed that ERP. Is that kind of how you're seeing it utilized?
Typically, yeah. I mean, there's different variations, but mobile kind of implies also just general mobility. So, I mean, it is apps, it is handhelds and tablets and devices like that, but it's also being able to work from anywhere. Especially obviously today, that's mobility too. So it's all part of mobility. Back in oh gosh, it was I think 2005. I used to sell this product called Field to Base. Have you ever heard of it? I don't know if it's still around or not, but I would go out to meet with contractors with this big tablet. I mean, they were so heavy and huge, but they were tablet PCs, and like nobody really knew about tablet PCs back then. But they were like, in these ruggedized cases, and we'd go out and be like, look, you can go out on the job site and you can take a picture and write on it and then send it back into the office. And everyone was like, oh, wow. And these things were $2,000 for the hardware alone. And then the monthly after that, we actually just ran across one the other day. We were cleaning out some closets and found an old one that we had sitting around the house. And we were laughing about it because it was so long ago. It's come such a long way. So, I mean, that back then was, people had, sometimes they would have a laptop on the job site. Often they would not have internet on the job site. They would maybe have a fax line on the job site. So we've just come so far in just, maybe 10 years, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, I remember running into Field to Base back then. They were, again, kind of ahead of their time for sure. They definitely, they were onto something. I think it was just a little ahead of the curve. We were using the Palm Pilots to collect data, and we thought, wow, how cool that would be to have the whole computer and a tablet and all that in one solution. But obviously it was probably a little bit too far of a gap to bridge early in those days.
I think it was, it was interesting because we had a lot of really quick early adopters that were just like, yes, but those were like the bleeding edge people. And then it just tapered off, and like, it was really hard to get adoption. I remember the first time I saw your product was at, I think it was either a Southeast Builders Conference or the International Builders Show. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. And I can't even remember what kind of device it was on. Maybe it was a Palm Pilot, but it was so cool because it was just, somebody showed it to me. It was a time entry, and it was basically clocking in and clocking out, I think. Is that, and it was just so simple. It had big buttons, and you just go, I'm in, I'm out. And it was like, wow, that's so different from having to buy a $2,000 tablet and then, have one person holds the tablet and everyone else comes and checks in on it and everything. So it was, pretty revolutionary what you guys had already back then in the mid 2000s, I think it was, or something, when I first saw it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I think it was the International Builder Show in Florida, if I remember right. So, and I think it was Field to Base out of North Carolina. Is that what I'm remembering?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So again, going back, we've come so far in actually a short period of time, really. We're talking like a decade or so, like you were mentioning, maybe a decade and a half. And I know I was a general contractor, and when I was, in my early and mid 20s and kind of growing up in the industry, so to speak, I know accounting was almost a swear word, back at that time. It was like a necessary evil, like paying your taxes, like you had to do it, but you didn't really like it. What's changed? Is it the same? And why is that perspective out there, do you think?
I think for one, maybe there's a perception that you need to understand accounting to use an accounting software.
Yeah, right.
You don't need to do a T account or debits and credits or things like that. I mean, that's all in play, but that's kind of behind the scenes. Assuming that you get it all set up right, then a modern accounting software, ERP software, kind of does it for you. You don't have to sit there and every time you make a transaction, enter in what GL account is going to and all that kind of stuff if you set it up properly based on your rules. So, it can be actually very beneficial because it's not just invoices, AP and AR. You've got now your job data in there and that's all incorporated in and you can get important reports out of it. So it's very valuable. It's not just this little thing that should be set over on the shelf alone to pay your bills and bill your customers.
Yeah, and I love what you said earlier about the mobility, because that's something I think is a great reminder for everybody. Mobility doesn't just mean smartphones and tablets and apps, but the ability to work remotely, even like you're saying, Darcy, even on the accounting level, have that data out there at your fingertips on the job.
Yeah, I remember when I was selling Timberline, and it was a on-premises software. There wasn't any cloud options for it, and then there'd be these other cloud products out there, and they'd go, and this was years ago. So people would come to me and go, "Is your software in the cloud?" And I'd say, "Is that important to you?" And they'd go, "Yeah, that's really important." And I'd say, "Why?" And they're like they didn't even know what it meant, but they just knew that they were supposed to be in the cloud. And so, but the argument was that, well, I mean, does accounting really need access from the field? I mean, they're in the office. Where are they going? That was kind of the thing back then. Obviously, today, we know that's not the case because number one, accounting this past year hasn't been in the office. But number two,
No, it hasn't.
but secondarily, I mean, I live in Florida, and sometimes we have hurricanes coming, and people have to go, and if they've got their server in their office, they got to go wrap it up and put it on high ground and pray for the best. If their server's damaged, then no one can work. If their power's out at the office and they're all relying on connecting to that on-premises server, even if they have figured out how to connect it remotely, securely, they still may not be able to access it if there's no power or the server's been damaged. So that's just one of the reasons why, back then, we didn't think of all those things and cloud wasn't as accessible as it is now. But today it's like, okay, yeah, you need to be in the cloud, even accounting.
Yeah, right. Well, and your challenge in Florida, definitely. I mean, that's unique. I'm in Utah. We don't have hurricanes here, so that's not, maybe like earthquakes or avalanches, but
Yeah.
different challenge. But it is interesting that a server is so critical for those that have their business hosted on it. I mean, what a risk to have that in one location that maybe isn't so secure.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, with cloud-based accounting systems or options now that the job site has visibility into the same data that the office does, what has that done in your perspective for efficiency of just construction or even industries in general that utilize these types of technologies?
I mean, it's the real-time data and it's the real-time bi-directional data, right? So, when something's happening on the job, there's technology like what you guys do that it makes it so easy for someone on the job to, they don't have to dig into some software and get it on a laptop at the end of the day and go enter a bunch of information and then, maybe print a report or whatever. And then someone else back at the office enters it in manually. And so the office gets access to that information much more quickly for whatever they may need it for their accounting purposes. And likewise, possibly more importantly, the field gets access to the data from accounting without having to wait until, that invoice hasn't been entered yet, or that invoice got entered, but I'm not sending you your report until tomorrow. And, it's right there immediately in real time. And ideally even with abilities to analyze the data, drill down into the data, slice and dice, do what if scenarios with the data right there in the field, to really know about any risks that you have on the job as far as budget or schedule issues that may be arising. So you just know that much faster and are able to react in time to mitigate the problem.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And I mean, I know I still hear this commonly. If companies aren't getting their invoices out quick enough, maybe the job's closed out, or maybe they're hitting another draw cycle. So not only speed of making decisions, but just getting paid and ensuring that you are getting paid. Sometimes companies don't get paid, and if the budget runs over and there are challenges with ownership or whoever, the bank, whatever, doesn't really matter. If you're last in line to get paid, sometimes if you do get paid, it might be pretty late.
All these things can make or break a job very easily. So underbilling can do that, and off schedule can do that. So there's a really lot of things to keep an eye on that, in the past, I mean, I've seen people getting faxes with the stack of papers. I mean, granted, I'm, aging myself a little bit on that, but I still think there's some of you guys out there that are doing that are maybe not faxing, but there's still a lot of paper being transmitted around, or reporting being transmitted around that we got to sift through and everything. And it's yesterday's data because somebody ran the reports this morning or whatever. So, real-time information is so much more accessible and so important.
Yeah. So you mentioned cloud-based, and that was the buzzword or the question, the checkbox that somebody felt like they should be checking off in order to be innovative. But what's the difference between cloud-based systems and cloud-hosted?
Typically hosted is really just going to be your software, only it's on someone else's server. Well, it's all on someone else's server, but someone else has a physical server for you or a virtual server somewhere, and they manage it instead of you managing it. So, and typically those are data centers where they've got, the temperature controls and the security and things of that nature. But they're still, like anything, subject to cyber terrorists and things like that. But it's still ultimately it's on-premise software. You still have to do your updates. Somebody still has to come in and update the software when there's a new version, and that kind of thing. So it's just it really isn't substantially different from an on-premises server, except that you typically have someone else who's maintaining this hardware for you, and you don't have to do that yourself.
So they're wrapping it in plastic when the hurricane comes instead of you.
Well, typically hosting centers will pick a location like that where there's very low natural disaster. There are probably a lot in Utah and whatnot. Not many in Florida, probably, but yeah. But with a cloud-based software, that's typically not the case. Now, there are some cloud-based softwares that are actually really just hosted on a large instance of AWS, and then there's also just true cloud software. So, it's all varying degrees. But typically, with a cloud-based software, you're not responsible for even worrying about that server, or even thinking about it. The upgrades can be pushed out automatically to you instead of you having to go say, okay, it's time for an upgrade. Let's go get all our ducks in a row and upgrade the software.
Yeah. And I think in my history, both as a contractor and as an executive here at a software company that sells cloud-based systems that used to do on-premise software, I can speak to the great cost savings of going to a cloud-based system where you're not paying for the labor to do those updates and the effort, the lags and the delays. Just that cost alone is very expensive, and something that I think contractors have primarily started letting go of that. I don't think that's a majority any longer, which is a good thing. But there are still some, like you said, that are still hanging onto their fax machines and still love their paper.
Yeah, no, it can be. The typical contractor does not have the technical expertise on staff to take care of all that. It is, and it's with. I could go on all day about this with security risks and things like that. It's just I would never want to trust it to the guy down the hall who's real good with computers. So you usually just go ask him when there's something wrong, like that. You don't want that person in charge of your sensitive data and your operations being up and running. So
yeah, it's very critical data. Definitely. I think sometimes we forget, we get busy and our hair's on fire, and we are just kind of used to doing things the way that we've always done them. And in construction, we're problem solvers. We're good at fixing things and jerry rigging stuff to, find a solution quickly. But this is not an area to try and cut those corners on, for sure.
Well, you don't think about it until you're lying in bed at night thinking, Oh, do we even have a backup?
Yeah.
We might have one, but have we ever tested actually restoring it?
Right.
And those
Yeah.
things get
Or
alleviated.
does the guy that knows how even still work here? I mean, I've heard that a lot. They lost the guy that knew. So
Yeah, well, and that's another point that, I think we should talk about is losing the guy that knew. Because I think, whether you've been on a software for a long time or you're new to a company that's using a software, I think it's so interesting that so many businesses only use just a fraction of what their ERP software can offer. And the person who set it up did it for whatever your business conditions were at that time, and maybe haven't evolved. I mean, maybe you didn't have a lot of people out in the field running all over the place. And so it wasn't a big deal at that time. But I think, businesses just need to remember that they should be checking and saying, where do we have manual processes? Where do we have gaps in communication? And just saying, how can we fill these? Because chances are there's a solution. It may even already be in your software. It may be an add-on solution. But, always keep evolving with your software, because I know the people that make the software are always evolving for you. And if you're not paying attention and you're just assuming that you can't do things, then, you're missing out on a lot of the value you could be getting out of your software.
yeah, that's a great point. I was just last month. It was very enjoyable. We were at a local AGC event. It was the 99th annual Utah chapter AGC conference, and they did have it in person, so it was wonderful. And in fact, they've got another event in a couple of days here, a safety conference that we're going to. So pretty excited about getting out there and seeing people again a little bit. But anyway, I was sitting down at dinner with a group that was telling me they're still on the same software, but they started doing concrete work. Then they got into general contracting. Then they started doing paving. And now they focus on construction for mining. And so they're like, and oh, by the way, and cell phone towers and maintenance. So it's like their entire business has shifted multiple times. And now they're looking for a software that's more designed for the things that they're doing. And they've tried to just navigate all of that with one ERP solution that probably is underserving them. So it's a great point you bring up, that our businesses change and we should regularly look at those different tools that we're using, make sure we keep them sharp. So do you have any scenarios that you've heard of companies that maybe for a specific reason they're not on the cloud, or they can't be for one reason or another? Do you run into those scenarios?
Yeah, it's usually when people don't like to be efficient or save money or communicate well. That's usually the the type of person that's best served staying. No, I would say that there are a couple examples where it's arguable that maybe it's not best to move to the cloud. But one being, there's people who there are businesses who are located in places where there's just not good internet. And that's
Okay.
going to be a challenge no matter what you do. So, there's tools out there that can combat that for the field tools, because a lot of tools, I believe yours will go ahead and work off a wireless connection, or will collect the data and then sync back up when you're in range. So, for that, argument's even going away a little bit. But if you've got a huge manufacturing plant in the middle of nowhere and you just don't have good internet, then that's one. Another one I would say is people who have a lot of HIPAA requirements tend to balk against having any kinds of cloud-based solutions, because there's just a lot of the products out there don't deal with that. I don't know that a lot of contractors have that problem. So those would really be the only cases where I've encountered people having legitimate reasons not to go to the cloud.
Well, that's good. So that means everybody else has an opportunity, I guess we'll say, to maybe look a
I
little
think
bit further
so.
if you haven't made the jump.
I don't know. Have you seen any other legitimate objections? I mean, I'm sure you've heard some,
I mean,
but
I hear some companies say they do, government work that's, maybe for
yeah.
certain reasons, or maybe a division or a department of their company that, like you said, different, very site specific, or again, where they physically are located. But yeah, nothing. I haven't heard too much that I don't think we could help solve with a cloud-based system. But people still think that on occasion that, maybe it's not best for their business, and maybe it's worth investigating that a little bit further with today's technology. So, So in our pre-call, you had mentioned something about cloud-based systems being evergreen. What does that term mean for the listeners? And is that something you can shed some light on?
Well, so I don't know. There's a lot of moving parts in regulations and in forms and things of that nature that change very regularly. I mean, the best example I can give is a great one, which is Avalara, which is a sales tax automation software that's cloud based, because they have, thousands and thousands of rule, rate, and boundary changes every year. And they just push those out to the cloud. So when you're connected to Avalara, you get the latest and greatest automatically because it's a cloud-based software. So all those types of things, any kind of compliance, it's much easier to keep on top of if you're not responsible for manually entering it into your system, because you're connected to the cloud and it's going to automatically bring the latest compliance, whatever type of apparatus you're going to need, whether it's tax or payroll forms or things of that nature, automatically. That can save you a ton of time and also keep you out of being in non-compliance.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, the OSHA or different safety regulations, especially with COVID, right? I mean, how many things are changing almost daily, weekly, monthly? I mean, there's been so many changes that everybody's been dealing with, and it would be nice to know that some institution or organization is on top of those things, and that's their full-time job, and you can just continue building buildings and doing the things that you're used to doing, and let them focus on. So with somebody who's maybe on a legacy system today, a server-based client server, and they're looking to move to the cloud, what does that journey look like, or what kind of project do you think that they're in for to make that change?
There's a lot to that. I would say that, it's scary, right? We have what we have. We don't want to lose what we have and our functionality. I mean, my advice would be definitely number one to talk to, contractors talk to each other. They're in the AGC, you're in the ABC, you're in the CFMA, talk to your peers and find out what they use, what shortcomings they found, and that kind of thing, to try to just, make sure you're picking the right choice based on what they tell you, not based on, what you read on the brochure from a software publisher, but what your peers are really saying. And then find a partner who specializes in construction and, a software reseller typically. And you'll know within a few minutes of talking to them probably if they really understand construction or not. And it's very imperative that they understand construction. There's a lot of companies out there that understand ERP, but don't necessarily understand the intricacies of construction. So, finding a partner, but it doesn't have to be horribly painful. You are going to probably have to make some decisions about how much data you want to convert, and people get a little scared about losing their historical data, but there are ways to mitigate that. You get choices to make about how much you want to bring over and how much you still need to be able to access. And there's a lot of technology out there to bring over the important data that you need. So those are the things, and just think long term. What you're seeing with some of the legacy systems in general in ERP, and I'm not calling out any one particular, but the non-cloud based, is that they're not investing a lot more in the future of these legacy products. And so if you want to keep being able to get the latest and greatest, and even a product. So if I'm a software publisher who makes an amazing business intelligence tool, and it's the coolest technology, and it's really awesome and everybody wants it, but I'm going to look at your old legacy product and I'm going to go, I'm not going to write an integration to that because that's dying off. And so you're potentially cheating yourself out of a lot of cool new technology ahead of the game, because people just aren't developing all this great new technology that's out there. There's AI, machine learning, all these things. Nobody wants to go build that for a product that's going away. So that's another consideration. Just start the move. Every journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So talk to people, hear their stories, and, get with the 2020s.
And I guess obviously you would say, because of what you're sharing, that it's well worth the move as soon as possible, not later, right?
I mean, that's what I've seen with adoption. I mean, honestly, I can't think I've ever heard of anyone say to me, "Ugh, I wish we never moved to the cloud."
Yeah. Right.
So
yeah. we did that here. We moved our accounting and ERP from an on-premise, and I remember having to get backups to the accountants and wait, hold on, don't do anything in this until we get the backup back from them. And I mean, it was just kind of a mess, and you were in a holding pattern, and you just can't do that these days. So we are so thankful that I can be on my phone, 1,000 miles away looking at a report or a dashboard in the accounting system.
Out in the woods, running around. How's the accounting doing?
Yep, trail running, checking those reports. No question. So before we wrap up, I always like to ask a few more personal questions. But even before that, I know, you're a respected podcast host. I've enjoyed many of your episodes. You have awesome guests on, and I've really enjoyed listening to your enterprise software podcast. Are there any guests or topics or stories or just something that really stuck out to you that you could share with our listeners that you learned or heard or you think that they might enjoy hearing?
Oh, thank you for the compliments. That's very kind of you. That's really hard because I have so many favorites, and one of my favorites is always a guy named Ed Kless. He's with Sage.
Oh yeah.
And I'd be curious to know how applicable his topics are to a construction company, because he is very much against hourly billing. Now, I don't know that the construction industry could ever really get away from that, but he does it. His whole concept is value-based pricing. So you're basing your pricing on the value of the output, not on the actual cost of the inputs, essentially. So his stuff's really good. I don't know how much of it you could adopt as a contractor, but it's very thought-provoking.
Yeah, well, and interesting too. I mean, the phrase "you can't teach an old dog new tricks," so to speak. Those ideas are always fascinating for me to hear, because again, construction's in my bones. I think like a contractor still. Sometimes I have to try and put on a technology hat and not look at things the way that I might have in order to be more effective in a technology space. But I think there's a lot of contractors out there that want to be more innovative. They just don't quite know how. And so when you're busy, and especially in a market that's just booming and crazy right now, it's pretty hard to find extra time and bandwidth to go and try something new.
Oh, agreed 100%. Another facet of what he talks about too is he's very passionate about subscription pricing for anything. And even just as a human being, as a consumer, you can learn a lot from him about how, he's basically saying everything's going to be in subscription, very soon. We're, look at how much we've switched everything to subscription. So that he's got some really interesting thoughts on that as well. So that helps maybe comfortable people feel more at ease with a subscription model that you typically have with cloud-based solutions, is just understanding, look, you've subscribed to Netflix, you subscribe to, whatever else you've always had certain subscriptions, and now it's more and more. So why not your software? Lower your operating expenses. Your capital expenses, and shifts a little bit towards your operating expenses. So
yeah, great advice. Well, so now that you've been on the podcast a little bit, and we've had a little bit of dialogue, I want to ask you a few personal questions. So nothing crazy, but so what's one skill that you feel like you've kind of mastered or been able to really implement in your business life that you could share with others?
Actually, I would say one of the biggest things that's had an impact on my business has been podcasting. It has been such a great opportunity for me to meet people that I would probably have otherwise never had access to, and learn from them and get their insights. And it's also really pushed me to keep up with the industry news that's important to my business, even though sometimes you're like, I don't want to read that article. I don't have time to keep up with everything. I'm like, I got to do it because we might talk about it on the podcast. I need to talk to my listeners about this. So that's been really valuable. And I encourage anyone to look into it, to doing a podcast. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun and can be very rewarding.
Yeah, I love that. You have that always learning attitude, and it shows. You're very well versed on a lot of topics. I'm sure this is a big part of why.
Thank you.
What about you bet. So what about your superpower? Is there something that's just like, when Darcy puts her cape on, what is that thing that you're going after?
Okay, well, I guess if we put my cape on, that's actually, it's when I put a badge on. at a conference. My stupid human trick, I prefer to call it than a superpower, because I feel like it's kind of, is networking. I love networking. I love going to conferences and meeting new people and introducing people that can partner together and help each other out. So it's just something that I really enjoy, and I humbly say I think I'm pretty good at. So that would be my stupid human trick superpower.
I love it. I remember meeting you at a conference over 10 years ago, and that wasn't by accident. So I'm sure that there's many others that you were memorable for. So I agree. So what's one mistake that you've made kind of in your business career that you wish, you would have learned earlier, I guess, maybe not a mistake, but something that you feel like you were able to overcome and improve that made an impact for you?
I think one thing I've learned is to be more willing to say no to things that aren't in my wheelhouse, which is not to say that you shouldn't try new things and branch out. But what it tends to do, in my experience and from what I've seen other people doing it as well, is take you on a learning curve that distracts you from your core profitable assets of your facets of your business. So that's a lesson I have to learn to myself. Sometimes like, oh, I could get involved in that. That sounds cool. Oh, but wait, I do have all this other stuff I have to do that I've been meaning to do that actually is part of my core business. Stay there. It's okay. Right. So, I mean, it's not to say don't try new things, but just be aware, is it worth going into? Is it going to help be healthy for your business in the long run to take something on?
Oh, that's great. I love that. Super applicable to our audience, of course. Do you take that job on that's totally not what you do just because you can and it's there? Or do you kind of stay in your lane and focus on what you're already good at? All right. Well, so the last question. So if our listeners were to take away one thing from yours and my conversation today, what would you hope that would be for them?
I would say to just keep in mind that cloud and mobile are not going anywhere. They're here to stay. So get into it.
Buckle up, Buttercup.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, Darcy. I've very much enjoyed catching up with you a little bit and having this conversation. I think our listeners will really enjoy this one.
Well, thank you. It's so good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll do it again down the road.
Okay.
And thank you for joining us on the Mobile Workforce Podcast today. To the listeners, sponsored by About Time Technologies and WorkMax. If you enjoyed Darcy and my conversation today, or were able to learn some helpful tips or tricks or insights, please give us a 5-star rating and review. And we would love you to also subscribe to the podcast. We appreciate you sharing this with your friends and colleagues. After all, our goal is to help you improve not only your business, but your life.